Hello there, I am Law, and this is The Joy of Computer Gaming, where we investigate intriguing, awful, and good examples of computer gaming history. Today's highlighted game is Ultima IV Quest of the Avatar, the atypical adventurer acquiring 8 assuredly admirable attributes ascending as an Avatar game. 8 counts as an A, right? It's a tile-based role-playing game by Origin Systems, released originally in 1985 for the Apple II, then later for the Commodore 64, the Atari 8-bit, 1986, Atari ST, the version I played, MS-DOS, MSX, FM7, Sharp X1, PC88, and PC98 in 1987, Amiga and Sharp X68000 in 1988, NES and Sega Master System in 1990, and FM Towns in 1992. There's also the enhanced MS-DOS version from 2001, XU4 from 2003, Virtue of Humility from 2003, the Flash version from 2010, the MegaZeux version from 2010, the Genesis Project update for Commodore 64 from 2015, the Avatarship mod for Neverwinter Nights from 2007-ish, the Ultima IV Reborn mod for Neverwinter Nights from 2010-ish, and even a new mod for the MS-DOS version that's still being worked on called Ultima IV Trinity. When I played this growing up, this was on the Atari 8-bit. However, unlike Ultima 3, this game had no music at all on this system. This was due to a decision to make it run on lower-end Ataris, and there wasn't enough memory available for the music. I also played the ST version later, and since it had better graphics and the music, it's the version I played through for this video. And now for the project that never wanted to end, Ultima 4. Much like the previous installments of the Ultima series, the game is played on tiles, with each representing terrain or a being or an object in that space. It is immediately recognizable, especially considering how many games have used a similar look ever since Ultima 1 came out. The graphics did not progress much from Ultima 3. Every character or NPC now animates separately and at a non-uniform rate, which certainly looks more believable than everything moving in sync with each other like the previous game, or completely static like in Ultima 2. The ships have directions they face now, there are different depths of water, hills as well as mountains, and so on. And there are a few new character images and loads of new monsters, but we'll get there in a bit. Dungeons have textured walls though, and look significantly better than the solid colors used in the previous game. The basic story of the game is simple but quite original, and is based around a philosophical core. The world is largely at peace, only interrupted by the creatures that occasionally roam the lands. 3 castles have been created based on truth, love, and courage. From these 3 principles arises 8 virtues, each with a city dedicated to them: compassion, honesty, honor, justice, pride, sacrifice, spirituality, and valor. You find out very quickly that pride was not a true virtue, the city based upon it is in ruins, and humility takes its place. Is it possible that someone could become an avatar of the virtues, living proof that a single person could follow all of the paths? Your goal in the game is largely unknown at the beginning, aside from knowing that there are 8 virtues and you have to complete each one before uncovering the Codex of Ultimate Wisdom. Completing a virtue is to gain an 8th of avatarhood. Should you ever stray from one of the virtues after gaining it, you can very easily lose it. The story furthers itself by talking to the NPCs in the cities of the world. Gaining avatarhood through the virtues is only the first part of the quest here. Many other tasks await to prove yourself truly worthy of the title Avatar. In the game, when you create a new character, there is an introduction sequence. A moon gate appears in a circle of stones and drops the game manuals and Ankh for you. The game even tells you to read the manual during the introduction. Afterwards, you see a Renaissance fair, but follow lute-like music through the crowds. Though the music does sound quite nice on a lute, there's no way at all that you could hear a lute through a crowd. They are very quiet instruments even in the best of conditions. That aside, following the sound, you come to a wagon on the edge of the woods with a gypsy who uses tarot-like cards and asks you questions. This is a simple test where you are eliminating virtues to narrow down the one you match the most, and this determines where you start the game and what class you are. I always end up being a bard, as I choose compassion over the other options with the questions asked. You are supposedly on Earth when this takes place, but both the text and the image show the moon gate simply opening, then closing, without you walking through it. So how did you get to Britannia? My guess would be the gypsy made you fall asleep after answering your questions and then had you tossed through the portal? Except you act surprised to see a fair here, as if you had already been portaled to Britannia at that point. In the sequels, you walk through the portal and that's how you get to the new world. As a side note, as with all of the previous games, the game manual is littered with great artwork by Denis Loubet. The game plays just like Ultima 3, with every letter doing a command and the arrows being used for movement. There are a couple minor changes, such as M for mixing spells and O for opening doors. You can use the mouse to move, pass, attack, and right-click on yourself for getting chests or entering places under your character. In combat, you could also right-click to attack enemies in the direction the arrow is showing, or click your character to ready a different weapon. You can also right-click on the character area to pull up the list of commands. I just preferred to play with the keyboard since I started on the Atari 8-bit version, which doesn't have a mouse. This is the first Ultima game to actually spend time on fleshing out a new fantasy world, albeit one using an alternate name for England, Britannia, likely because Lord British is the creator of it. The strange part to this, though, is that they tried to make a story of how this world came to be from the first 3 Ultima games. The game worlds of those games were nothing alike, with Ultima being 4 separate lands and having space travel too, Ultima 2 being on Earth and the solar system across various times, and Ultima 3 being its own world with a single large continent, which is the closest to what Ultima 4 has, but it's completely different. Trying to make these seem like a single world over time is just weird, and reading about it feels very forced. I mean, come on, did they need to mention the stupid tiles attacking you in Ultima 3? They didn't bring up traveling in a spaceship to a non-existent planet X to get a ring to let you go back in time and then fight Minax while being beat on continuously by her invincible guards from Ultima 2. By the way, the Ultima 6 manual changes the history quite a bit so that the first 3 Ultimas were all handled by the Avatar as well. The hero in the first 3 games, as chronicled in the manuals for Ultima 4 and Ultima 5, was just a stranger each time, or 4 strangers for Ultima 3, and not even the same one. In Ultima 6, the manual is written specifically for the Avatar, and now suddenly you are the champion from the first 3 games. This doesn't make any sense, but it'll come up time and again. Honestly, if Richard Garriott had started anew with Ultima 4, continuity would have been easily maintained from this point forward. In any case, starting with Ultima 4, all of the main Ultima games, aside from Ultima 8, take place in Britannia. The world map was huge for the time, 16 times the world map of Ultima 3 at 256 by 256 tiles. This did necessitate regularly loading parts of the map while traveling, as even with 4 bits of data per tile, the entire map would occupy 32K of RAM, far too much memory to use just for the map on an old 8-bit game. Because the map is so large, they created a simple coordinate system that you can check using a sextant to find specific locations, which you will need to find hidden items in the world. Just like previous Ultima games, the world map acts like a torus, wrapping around north to south and east to west. The game also came with a cloth map, which unfortunately is lacking some details that would have been useful, such as where the dungeons are. Back from Ultima 2 is Ground That Hurts You, except this time it poisons characters randomly. When trying to go through certain terrain types, sometimes you fail and the game says slow progress. The hills, for example, have a 75% chance of doing this, so this makes those terrain types annoying to travel through. There are also now 3 depths of water where ships cannot go into the shallowest water. There's still a whirlpool that I never saw for more than a second even after playing the game several times, but I spent far too long trying to find one to show you that it takes you to a lake that you normally can't even reach to be allowed access to Cove, one of the little villages. I usually just get there using the balloon without a problem when I play. There's also a water spout or twister out at sea that just does loads of damage to you and your ship. You can get around on ships, horses, and a balloon instead of just walking. Ships are still subjected to the winds, though now there's no calm winds. You can go directly into the wind, but you only move once every 4 attempts, or away from the wind and move 3 out of 4 times. There is a wind change spell, but it could change again anytime afterwards. Ships also have 50 health and take 10 damage every time you get hit by an overworld attack. You can double it to 99 with the wheel if you have it, and it slowly repairs over time. If you lose your ship, you die instantly. Ships have a direction now, and you can only fire sideways, which makes sense.
Heave another broadside into him, pegleg.
In the balloon, you can only launch and land, being completely at the whim of the wind. Horses don't seem to do anything, since monsters keep up with you just fine when you're on them. As always, there are moon gates that you could use to get around more quickly, and eventually just teleport directly to any of their target spots, though, unlike previous Ultimas, the moon phases now change separately from the timer in the game, so you can just pause and wait for the appropriate phases and the moon gate will appear. Like Ultima 3, there are 3 phases of the second moon for every phase of the first, so you can now reach up to 3 locations from each. There are 3 doubles, one takes you to the Shrine of Spirituality, the other 2 take you nowhere. There are also 8 cities, 4 villages, and 4 castles, with Castle Britannia taking up 3 spaces. Dungeons and 8 shrines, though one is hidden. Oh, I kinda just gave that away, didn't I? Cities behave just like they do in previous Ultima games. Castles have 2 stories, so they are technically 2 maps each. The dungeons look an awful lot like they have the entire series, and are much smaller than they were in Ultima 3 at only 8x8. There are still traps and winds that knock out your light, but there are also orbs that will raise stats and hurt you based on which dungeon you're on. Monsters wander around the halls of the dungeon, similar to how they did in Ultima 2, though combat is still a separate screen. Dungeons make up for being small by having special rooms which you traverse in combat mode, often with hidden trip plates that change the room or false walls to go through. Fortunately, as these areas occasionally have enemies you cannot see, or where you can't even attack them, you do not lose valor for leaving these rooms with enemies still in them. And lastly are the shrines, which are how you meditate and gain each of the 8 virtues once you are ready. You must find the appropriate rune to even be able to enter them, you must know the mantra, and then you can meditate for 0 to 3 cycles. Meditating for 0 does nothing, but 1 to 3 cycles will make you pause, type in the mantra each cycle, and will give you a hint to better yourself on the corresponding virtue. The virtues are a feature that truly sets this game apart from anything else, even the rest of the series. You not only need to complete each virtue, but then for the rest of the game you have to stay virtuous, or you will immediately lose it. There is an in-game reason for your character to be a good person for a change. I'm going to get all techie on you for a moment here. You can think of the virtues as a 3-bit value, with each bit being the primary truth, love, and courage, resulting in 8 final options. Each virtue has a city, a class, a mantra, and aside from humility, a corresponding dungeon that's the opposite of the virtue. Humility is the lack of truth, love, and courage. The class for it is a shepherd, and the corresponding city, Magencia, was destroyed because they followed the opposite, pride. The village of Vesper is the de facto city of humility. There is no dungeon to match it. Oddly enough, there are hordes of demons defending its shrine, which you can at least use the Silver Horn to make easier to approach. In my opinion, humility shouldn't even be a virtue in the game, as it is regularly at odds with the others, particularly honesty and valor. In some points in the game, you have to lie to stay humble, such as when an NPC asks if you're an avatar. If you say yes, you lose humility. If you say no, but you're the avatar, you lose honesty. Well, you would think you would, but the game doesn't actually gauge that properly, so you don't. Something like persistence, a virtue brought up in Ultima 6, would have made more sense, but it would have been harder to implement as well. You could even have sloth as the opposite. With just truth, you have honesty, with a class of mage, which is based in Moonglow and has a dungeon of deceit. With truth and love, you have justice, a class of druid, which is based in you and has a dungeon of wrong. I guess justice makes right? Kind of? With truth and courage, you have honor, with a class of paladin based intrinsic and has a dungeon of shame. With truth, love, and courage, you have spirituality, with a class of ranger which is based in Skarbray and has a dungeon of Hithloth. I don't know what Hithloth means, though one source says the original name was Hyloth and was based on Hylothism, a philosophy where you identify matter as a god or gods. With just love, you have compassion with a class of bard, and it's based in Britain and has a dungeon of despise. With love and courage, you have sacrifice, a class of tinker, the city Minok, and it has a dungeon of covetous. And lastly, with just courage, you have valor, with a class of fighter, which is based in Jalom, and has a dungeon of destard. Destard is a misspelling of dastard, which means being mean, sneaky, and cowardly, so I guess it fits. I do have to say that fleeing from non-evil beings, such as spiders, is not a cowardly act and does not make you lose valor. I never knew that until making this video. You cannot just see a stat to see how well you're doing in the virtues. Instead, you have to talk to Hawkwind in Castle Britannia to get an idea of where you stand. Once you have completed a virtue, you meditate at the shrine for 3 cycles, which takes quite a bit of time, and then it'll let you know you've succeeded and give you part of an Ankh that shows up under your character list. Once you've completed all of the virtues, you'll have a completed Ankh here. Being done certainly doesn't stop you from losing virtues, though. In some cases, you may lose multiples at a time, such as cheating a merchant or attacking someone in town. You have to work the virtue back up again and go back to the shrine if you ever lose a virtue. Your main character, the one on the quest to Avatarhood, is one of the 8 classes in the game and is chosen by the virtue you favor during the A-B personality test at the beginning of the game. This type of personality test has been copied many times in future games, such as Elder Scrolls Arena, which suggested a class for you based on a questionnaire favoring warrior, rogue, or wizard-like answers. In Ultima 4, if your final choice is honesty, you become a mage, or if you choose compassion, like I always do, you become a bard. This not only chooses your class, but also governs where you start the game and your starting stats and gear. During the course of the game, you will find 8 NPCs that will join you, which are of the 8 classes. You cannot recruit the NPC that matches your class. Since I was a bard, even though Iolo says he will join me, he then says he won't join me without giving me a reason. Well, it was because we were both bards. We can't very well have 2 bards in one party, now can we? I mean, one of us would have to be relegated to doing harmony. Anyways, by the end of the game, you'll have a full party of 8, with a member of every class. Each class is a mixture between a fighter and a mage, with fighter and mage being at the extremes. Fighters have no casting ability, but can use most weapons and armor, whereas mages have the best casting ability, but cannot use most weapons and armor. An unusual and frustrating decision was made here that fighters are so much against magic, they can't even use magic weapons except a magic sword or magic plate. In that regard, a paladin is the most versatile class in the game because they get half the magic of a mage and can use just about every weapon and armor except the magic wands. Those magic wands are pretty nice, though. These are not balanced classes at all. If we show just the 4 classes that get half magic, the only differences between them are what they can equip, and you can easily see they're unbalanced. Then there is the Shepherd, which is technically a fighter, but with far fewer choices in gear. Future Ultima games did not keep this class system, and in fact Ultima V only had 3 choices: full fighter, half mage fighter, and full mage. Each character has a level from 1 to 8, strength, dexterity, and intelligence, and health with a maximum of 100 times the level. Leveling to level 2 takes 100 experience, 3 takes 200, 4 takes 400, all the way to level 8 requiring 6400. Strength, dexterity, and intelligence max out at 50. Strength is a flat value added to the damage you do, dexterity controls how well you hit, and intelligence controls your magic points based on your class. Half mages get intelligence magic points, whereas mages get double intelligence magic points up to 99. Fighters and shepherds get no magic points. You'll only get experience from combat. In some versions of the game, you supposedly get experience from finding the unique items across the world, but in the ST version you either get nothing or it's quite negligible, so that I never even noticed. Another first for the Ultima games is that you can finally rest to gain back health. Though if you do it too often it'll have no effect, and there's also a chance to be ambushed. There are also inns in town where you can pay to rest. There are various weapons and armors in the game, but you just want to get your characters the best ranged weapon they can use, and once you become the Avatar you can equip everybody with the Mystic Armor, which is supposedly the best armor in the game. Ranged weapons are such a huge advantage, and the magic weapons your mage, druid, and bard can equip are particularly devastating in battle. A couple unique weapons exist in the game. Magic axes are throwing axes that will return to you after you attack with them. Very handy. The other halberds attack only 2 spaces away and are difficult to make useful. Sure, you can attack over allies or even over terrain with it, but the moment an enemy is on top of your character, they're helpless. Well, while wielding a halberd. Secret guilds sell torches, keys, and gems like in Ultima III, but also the necessary sextant. Gems allow viewing an overhead map, but are one use. Keys allow unlocking any door. Why any of these other than the keys are considered black market items is anybody's guess. You'll also collect the 8 runes for the 8 virtues, the 8 stones, and so on. There are some optional items such as the wheel of the HMS Cape. You'll find out what these do during the journey. You also have to maintain food like always. If you run out of food, everybody takes 2 damage per turn, which gets bad quickly. Lastly, there are the reagents and spells. You combine 1 or more of the 8 reagents to make one of the 26 spells conveniently mapped to the letters A through Z. 6 of the reagents you can buy from shops, from blind merchants, where you can cheat the price, losing virtue by doing so. The other 2 reagents have to be found in the world, and are only used for very powerful spells. Since you have to mix your spells ahead of time, they too act like items. But casting them is just like the previous Ultima games. As long as you can afford the magic point cost, you can cast them, regardless of level or class. Most of the spells are taken right out of Ultima III, with Cure, Heal, Resurrect, Magic Missile, Light, Exit, Y for Up, Z for Down being some familiar ones. Tremor is just the same as the ZXKUQYB for clerics or the Nameless spell for wizards. It kills a random number of enemies, so sometimes it's handy. The game adds Sleep as a debuff, but it is more like a Paralyze. A sleeping character can get hit over and over and never wake up. Thankfully, Awaken is cheap to make and cast. There are now spell fields to deal with as well. Fire, which just does damage, Energy, which acts like a wall, Poison, which poisons, and Sleep, which, you guessed it, puts you to sleep. A Dispel spell is available to be able to get rid of these, though it's usually easier to just walk through poison fields because curing poison is very easy now. Dispel gets used a lot near the end of the game. You can change the direction of the winds with Wind Change, but it is random how long that lingers. One of my favorite spells is Gate Travel, which lets you pick a phase of the moon to teleport to, starting from 1 for new moon and 8 for a waning crescent. You can now teleport almost at your whim. You will also cast Awaken, Cure, and Heal quite a lot. Pretty much all the rest of the spells are not very useful, at least for me, especially after you get the best weapons, so I rarely used them. Instead of NPCs only saying single lines of dialogue, now you actually converse with them with a simplistic text parser. They don't have a great deal to say, the game was made for 8-bit systems after all, but this was a huge step forward in role-playing since now you actually could talk to the inhabitants of the game world. The parser only checked the first 4 letters of what you typed in, but it did let you type in a lot more, so normally you wouldn't even notice unless you experimented a bit. Each NPC may have a dialogue option that asks you a yes or no question as well, which would give a different answer depending on what you say. This is where the conversation-based virtue changes happen. For example, if you talk to Patrick here, he will ask if you're always humble. If you say yes, you're actually not being humble and it makes you lose humility. It should also make you lose honesty because you can never properly answer this question with a yes. One of the NPCs asks if you're an avatar. If you say yes, you lose humility, but not honesty even if you aren't. If you are the avatar and say no, nothing happens because I guess they didn't code in to test whether it's a lie or not. The manual mentions a few example phrases that everybody responds to: job, health, name, buy, and give. It's also handy to ask NPCs in the major cities about the mantra of the virtue if you don't know it already. Or just press enter on a blank prompt to say bye. After that, you have to guess other words from what they've said to you. For example, say job to Sprite here and she mentions she needs to beg now. Type in beg, and she asks if you'll help her, and if you say yes, she tells you to ask Pepper about the rune.
Richard Garriott was not very creative with NPCs, with many modeled after his real-life friends and employees, like Io, who was David Watson, Dupre, who was Greg Dykes, Jeffrey, who was Jeff Hillhouse, and Hawkwin, who is Ro R. Adams III. Richard Garriott himself appears as 2 different people in the world, Lord British and Shamino. The Ontos family, including Father Ontos from Ultima II, makes an appearance, as well as Brother Ontos and Sister Ontos. Many other NPCs are based on famous historical figures or popular fictional ones, such as Balthazar, Melkor, Shakespeare, Buddha, Merlin, and Michelangelo. On a completely different note, there's a Skadu that's somehow wearing the mystic armor, which supposedly only the Avatar can wear. So how is he wearing it? If he's already an Avatar, what am I doing here? And what the heck kind of name is Skadu anyways? Or is it Skadu?
There are now children in the game which you can attack and kill, which probably cause problems in some countries like Germany since games aren't allowed to show children being harmed. This is a game about being virtuous, yet you can kill a child. Wait, you get 10 XP for killing a child? More than killing a demon? Okay, now that's messed up. The combat system has been reworked. While the controls are the same, the way they are done has been updated and made more fair. The number of enemies scale on how many people you have in your party, up to twice the size of your party for weaker opponents. If you're alone, you'll only ever face 1 or 2 enemies at a time. However, if you have a full group, expect 4 to 8 enemies for the tougher creatures or 8 to 16 for the easier ones. Your level is used to determine the strength of the enemies that appear, at least in the overworld. In the beginning, you'll only ever see weak enemies roaming the world. By the end of the game, tougher enemies are mixed in like Etans or even demons roaming the land. Speaking of demons, they can fly over land and water to get at you. Others, such as dragons, can also fly. You can flee in combat, and so can your enemies. Now the game keeps track of how hurt the enemies are, and once they hit a certain point, you'll get a message that they're fleeing and they will make their way to an edge to try to flee. The AI controlling your enemies is a bit strange here. They don't simply charge straight at you like in Ultima III, they're a little random instead. They can no longer move or attack diagonally, though they are allowed to shoot diagonally to be more annoying. And some enemies, such as Balrons, can cast the dreaded Area Sleep spell, which will put a random number of your characters to sleep for who knows how long. To facilitate the evil versus non-evil part of the game, now there are strictly evil monsters such as orc cyclopses, demons, dragons, and so on, and non-evil creatures which are all real animals such as insects, bats, rats, and spiders. You can freely flee from combat against non-evil creatures, and in fact this helps your compassion without hurting your valor. But fleeing from evil creatures hurts your valor, whereas defeating them raises your valor. Many of the new monsters come straight from Dungeons & Dragons, with Etans, Mimics, and Zorns all taken more or less directly from it. Gazers are just modified beholders, though in 3rd edition D&D they added gazers as well, so Ultima copied D&D, and then D&D copied Ultima. Liches are based on D&D's demi-liches, which are often only a skull. And Reapers, which are magic-casting trees, are remarkably similar to Ropers from D&D. Cyclops and Hydras are from Greek mythology, whereas the Headless seem to be based on the Acaphaloi or Blemmies, but thankfully they don't have chest faces because that just looks ridiculous. Lava lizards are a real animal named so because of the bright red on them, not because they can literally spit lava at you. When you encounter a group of enemies, sometimes one or more of them are upgraded. In some cases, they can be upgraded multiple tiers, so you could be fighting ghosts, but they'll have a demon and a lich with them. An interesting addition is that, when you walk over a bridge, you may be attacked by bridge trolls. This is the only outdoors battle where you can start on the side of the screen instead of at the bottom. Your opponents are still quite a pushover, however, probably because you have to fight so many of them. They are rarely much of a challenge and are much more a nuisance than anything else. Once you have the best weapons in the game, you'll randomly one-shot even dragons with your magic wands, so they do not feel particularly scary. Treasure chests now give between 0 and 99 gold each, but they will never give you armor or weapons anymore. 0 gold? Lame. Like Ultima 3, Ultima 4 had music created by Kenneth W. Arnold. However, the music in Ultima 4 feels like a step down from Ultima 3. For the most part, it's slow, peaceful music with the calm traveling music, the peaceful city music, the pleasant little shopping ditty, and the almost serene dungeon dirge. Shrines don't have Ultima's popular Stones music yet, but instead a high-pitch, even calmer variation of the traveling music, which just gave me a headache listening to for very long. Aside from these, you'll hear the really short combat music quite a lot. The castle music, which is really dark sounding in contrast to everything else. And when you talk to Lord British, now the old British song Rule Britannia by Thomas Arne is used. Of these, I only particularly care for the city and castle music. If you press V, you disable the music and get some really awful sound effects, at least on the ST. I just prefer not to have it this way and listen to the music instead. After playing the game when I was about 8 or 9, my mother and I started trying to keep with the virtues ourselves, in real life. For a long while I even used a symbol that looked like this, which is showing how I felt I had achieved 6 of the 8 virtues, but could never quite fulfill the last 2, which were valor and humility. I'll talk more about this at the end of the video. Once you learn how the various virtues work, you can really game the system. You lose in honor, honesty, and justice by cheating the blind reagent merchants, but you can gain them all back by not cheating them. This doesn't take into effect how much you're buying, so you can start the game by buying, say, 99 of each reagent for 1 gold each stack, and then come back later and buy, say, 20 one at a time at full price, and then you'll be good again. For compassion, you can easily get it all the way up by giving 1 gold at a time to a beggar. I think it remembers while you're in a town, so just leave and come back. For humility, you have to answer a couple different NPC questions humbly, so just leave and come back a few times and you're good. For sacrifice, just heal up and give blood a few times. Spirituality will go up just by talking to Hawkwind a few times and visiting the other shrines. I've never had to specifically work on it. Valor also just goes up. Don't run from evil enemies and just kill a bunch of them. Valor might as well be known as the kill a bunch of stuff virtue. To complete the game, you need to gather up the 8 runes, get the 8 stones, mostly from the dungeons, get the Candle of Love, the Book of Truth, the Bell of Courage, get the Skull of Mondaine, though some sources say it's optional, get the 3 parts of the keys from the altars in the dungeons, learn the 2 passwords you need, attain max level and the 8 virtues, get to level 8, and get a full party of 8 characters. To get to level 8, you have to get to 6400 experience or more. The only way to get experience in the game is by killing things. This seems rather counter to the feel of the game and is by far my least favorite aspect of it. Every time I've played the game, I am nowhere near this amount of experience by the time I'm ready to complete the game. Luckily, there is a place that infinitely spawns enemy to speed up the process, the Shrine of Humility. Use the horn to get down to the shrine, then try to walk down. If you fail to move, 8 encounters of demons occur and you don't have to deal with the annoying hilly terrain combat screen because you're on the shrine. It took me about 6 hours of grinding here, forcing the avatar to kill most of the enemies to get the experience needed. Just don't forget to bring loads of awaken and healing spells. Fortunately, I had other things to do while I was grinding. When I was waiting for my mana to regenerate while playing through Anvil of Dawn, since you can't rest in that game, I did some grinding in Ultima IV. Since you can't wait for a specific time of day in Gothic 2, I had to just stand around for a while, waiting for Wolfgar to come along at 5 AM and give me 2% one-handed skill for free. Might as well do some more Ultima 4 grinding while I'm waiting. Getting the 3 parts of the key takes a little while and requires 7 of the 8 stones from the dungeons. Well, 6 are in dungeons. Then you can just hop into Hithloth from Castle Britannia, which takes you to the bottom right away, and all 3 altars are right there. Make the parts of the key using the stones, cast exit, then gate travel to wherever you need to go. If you don't have all of the stones, these altars connect you to the respective dungeons already at the bottom, so aside from shame, this makes it a lot easier to find the stones as well without having to travel to the entrance of each dungeon. There are extras as well to make things easier. Once you become the Avatar, you can find a set of 8 Mystic Armors, which are the best armor in the game. I bought 1 set of Magic Plate just for the heck of it, but it isn't as good, so why bother? There are also the Mystic Weapons, but they're swords and they don't have a range, so they aren't really helpful. There's the HMS Cape Wheel, which makes your ship a lot stronger, so it's easier to get to the Abyss since there are loads of ships in the way, but you don't need it. And there's the Silver Horn, which makes it a lot easier to get to the Shrine of Humility, but again, you don't need it. Once you have everything you do need, you take it all to the Abyss to extract the Codex of Ultimate Wisdom. The Abyss is one final dungeon with loads and loads of horrible rooms, a couple of which chain in a long, snaking path to get through. It takes literally hours, about 2 for me with maps to make it faster, to get through to the bottom. There are so many rooms with Balrons or Reapers that just constantly put your characters to sleep. Tremor helps randomly, being a random spell and all, though maybe I should have made more of them. At the end of each level, you answer the correct virtue and put in the correct stone to proceed. Once there is even a false ladder to waste your time thinking you get to skip the virtue and stone process. Yeah, no. At long last, you reach the entrance to the Codex. You are asked a series of questions, and if you get a single answer wrong, you're forced out of the dungeon entirely and have to redo the entire process. You have no chance of saving while doing any of the dungeon either, so don't typo. This question is bad. This sounds like humility, doesn't it? Fail. Hey, it put me next to Minoc, which means it's sacrifice. Yeah. Okay then, Lord British, okay. I consider Ultima 4 to be the most unique or maybe even most important of the Ultima games, but I did not find playing the game again to be fun, unlike later games in the series like Ultima 6 and Underworld. This game is quite a slog at the end, with having to go through the dungeons, grind up levels, and then deal with the Abyss. I have now completed the game all the way through twice, and as you'll find out, I've restarted the game at least 30 times. Though I feel this is a good game worth playing through once just for the experience, doing so a second time felt like a real chore as there isn't really any replayability in it. There are a few bugs that were still in the game when it was released. The most notorious bug comes from Smith the Horse. He was supposed to tell you about the final answer to reach the Codex. However, a bug prevented his dialogue from happening, so he only says a couple of lines instead. You can figure this out on your own, since completing each virtue gives you one of the letters you need. Origin decided to make a running gag out of this, and Smith appears through various Ultimas up through Ultima 7 Part 2, giving you a hint that you should have learned in the previous game. In Hithloth on level 6, there's a room that is not configured properly. You cannot get through this room as it was designed to be a dead end, but it should have allowed you to exit to the west. This didn't stop you from completing the game, but it was a point of frustration, and someone even patched the room later. If you attack a monster in town before it attacks you, you are treated as a criminal, and you also lose 8ths as if you attacked an innocent. The Mystic Swords and Armor were meant to be the only weapons and armor you could use in the Abyss, but this is definitely not the case in the versions I've played. The armor is great, but those swords have no real use. You can sell them for 3,500 gold each for a total of 28,000 gold, meaning this is an easy way to buy up the best ranged weapons in the game once you've completed the 8 virtues. You can use an orb on a non-existent character. You'll have to leave the dungeon and come back to get the orb to respawn if you pressed the wrong number. Oops. Some ladders in the dungeons don't line up properly, such as this one from level 3 to 4 and wrong. In some cases, the music won't change correctly. For example, answering questions at the Abyss incorrectly ejects you, but the dungeon music then plays on the overworld. NPCs and monsters can enter damaging spaces or walk through rough terrain as though it wasn't there. I once had Zircon here try to kill me by walking into the forge with me as I was grabbing the Rune of Sacrifice, trapping me in here. I would have been killed by his negligence if he didn't happen to randomly move out of the way. Imagine having killed the Avatar, being forever on your conscience, Zircon. Though you cease to exist after this game, so maybe that doesn't matter so much. In some dungeon rooms, coming from certain directions, your characters are all stacked in a single tile. I'm not certain this wasn't intentional, but it felt buggy whenever it happened. There were also a few bugs that were in the original Apple II game that got fixed by the time the Atari ST version came along.
You could exit the balloon while it was flying, which would immediately land the balloon, even on terrain it couldn't normally land on, and part of the balloon state would stay. You could see through everything, and monsters and NPCs would no longer move. You could just get back into the balloon and land it properly to undo the bug.
If you were on a ship and it got damaged, you could just exit and reboard the ship to fix it. You supposedly could go back and get the mystics again and again for easy infinite wealth. The open spell had a 100% chance of you getting hit by a trap if there was one. Shrine messages for 2 and 3 cycles showed the message for 1 cycle, which also affected the Commodore 64 and Atari 8-bit versions. This I actually captured, and you can see after 3 cycles I get the message for sacrifice on the Apple II that you get after 1 cycle elsewhere. Here's the correct message for 3 cycles. In Skara Brae, Shamino was originally right next to the Ankh. If you were a ranger, you could never have him join you, and therefore could never talk to the cross. As you can see, this was corrected by moving him a space away from it. And after you hit the max experience, 9,999, you could no longer gain Valor. If you weren't done with Valor, or if you did anything to lose it, you would be dead man walking at that point and could not complete the game. At the end of my Atari ST run, I still had over 1,300 experience to go before hitting the maximum, so I'd wonder how many people ever even had a problem with this. If you use the Skull of Mondain, you immediately lose all 8ths, and it kills everybody on the map you're on. This has no lasting impact, because if you use it in a city, you could just leave and re-enter it and everybody's back. I tried it in Castle Britannia, and though it didn't kill Lord British, he still talked to me as though nothing had ever happened. It doesn't kill him, and you can't defeat him in battle, but if you run away from him, he gets snuffed out of existence. I'm not sure this exactly counts as killing him. The many versions of this game are quite varied, and I probably spend far too long talking about each. But since this is one of the most unique RPGs in history, I felt it warranted spending a bit more time pointing out many of the differences. There were far more than I put in here, but you'll get the idea. For reference, I created a bard, went to Britain, talked to Pepper, talked to Sprite, got the Rune of Compassion, talked to Yolo, headed to Paz, ripped off the reagent merchant, headed to Minok, got Julia to join me, got the Rune of Sacrifice, headed down to the Shrine of Sacrifice and meditated there, headed to Wrong, wandered a bit trying to find enemies, went to level 2, went into the first room, killed a couple things, then died, talked to Lord British, and finally talked to Hawkwind. This run takes about 20 minutes on fast systems like the Atari ST and FM Towns, and over an hour on slow systems like MSX and PC-88, but it shows most of the gameplay. This is the original version of Ultima IV, released by Origin Systems in 1985 on the Apple II. We need to have 1 or 2 Mockingbird add-ons to enable the music, but it sounds pretty good here considering the age of the system. Some of the music plays a bit faster than the ST version. The music got a bit choppy every time during loading, which was very noticeable in the new character sequence, but also while wandering around outside. The shrine music also didn't hurt like the ST's shrine music. The game did have sound and music at the same time, too. New character sequence was at least largely fast to load, and did a little side swipe effect when switching scenes. It plays music when the fair part is shown, though each scene load causes a little break in it, along with a weird, long, glitchy delay after the wipe as well. Graphically, it's almost identical to Ultima 3, often with the same sprites. We'll be seeing this a lot going forward in the other versions, so I'm not going to bring it up every time, but it is worth noting since I did use the ST version for my main review, which was a very colorful version in contrast, owing to a more advanced graphics system. The new character sequence in particular was notably less colorful looking here. This feels like much the same game though, except the slow speed of the Apple II is really felt here on occasion. The game is not very responsive to my key presses, with a sizable delay between when I press the key and when something happened in the game. Since there was a small keyboard buffer, this also often led me to accidentally bumping into things while moving around difficult terrain, or giving bad commands to my characters. There was also slow typing when talking to NPCs. Another notable difference was that when buying reagents, you could only buy up to 9 at a time, which felt rather tedious to deal with, but it did punish you more when cheating the blind merchants. The spell fields are random dots like the ST version, which did look pretty good actually, with the same colors as on the ST as well. Secret walls are just like the ST version, with an extra dot in them. The dungeons look about the same as in previous Ultima games, but with visible enemies with black boxes around them. The special rooms use regular tiles, so they look just fine here. Otherwise, it plays much the same without too much difference. Here is the Commodore 64 version, released by Origin Systems in 1985. It has the cleanest looking graphics of the first 3 releases, though I don't know how much of that is due to the emulator. The music in this version sounds pretty wonky, though that synth sound just seems to be how music sounded on the C64. There is no wipe effect or any music in the new character sequence, just long loading times between each scene shift. Just like previous installments of Ultima, the C64 movement controls are strange. I found you can use Shift-2, the @ sign, for north, Control left bracket for west, Control right bracket for east, and / for down. Almost the same as Ultima 3. At least it's more responsive than the Apple II version, though typing when talking to NPCs is still slow enough to eat key presses if you type quickly, as if it doesn't have a buffer at all. Just like the Apple II version, you could only buy 9 of each reagent at a time. Spell fields here look like the other versions, and again, secret walls have an extra dot. The dungeons use just vertical lines, so they look much worse than any other version. They look just like this in the Commodore 64's Ultima 3 as well. Odd choice considering how much of the rest of this version looks so clean compared to the other 8-bit versions. The loading times are really bad here though. After starting up the game, you have to wait more than 2 minutes before the introduction starts up. The new character sequence took a long time as, before every scene, there's a long waiting period. Once in the game, loading occurs every few steps and it stifles the gameplay. Talking to Lord British is particularly bad because you have to swap discs and wait for a lot of loading. Then when you're done, swap discs again and wait some more. Skip this version unless you're really patient. This is the Atari 8-bit version released by Origin Systems in 1986. As I said earlier in the video, this is the version I personally played before, and it is one of the least impressive versions. It uses artifacting and attempts to use the less popular version with light blue and dull green colors along with black and white. The emulator I usually use, Altera, doesn't support this mode, so everything looks wonky with it in green and magenta. So for this episode, I'm going to be using Atari 800 Win instead. The emulator patches the disk drive so loading times are instantaneous. This, combined with the very fast graphics rendering compared to the other 8-bit versions, made it a very quick version to play. However, it still had a bit of input lag and it queued up I think up to 8 key presses, so often I was moving many times after I stopped pressing keys, which was frustrating. The keyboard buffer was also used in conversations, so though slow, they at least didn't lose key presses. There is no music in this version. I didn't even realize Ultima 4 had music until I tried the Atari ST version way later because of this. The sound is comparable to Ultima 3's sound, and if you recall from my episode on Ultima 3, I never wanted to hear the sound. The fields look sufficiently random, though the sleep fields look like wonky eyeballs or maybe webs. Energy fields are white, poison fields are blue, and fire fields are dark green. They don't look this way in any other version, and it's one of the most distinct things I remember about playing through the game back in the day. Secret doors are the same as the other versions, just a dot. The dungeons don't look much different than Ultima 3's, with blocks around the enemies and items that show up. In my version, the Rune of Sacrifice is bugged. When I tried to get it, it just says 43676638555435050. I tried a second time and got it again. After getting out of the forge and checking my inventory, I only had the Rune of Compassion. So it looks like the discs I have are bugged. This may be a form of copy protection, but I've never seen it before. Well, there's the reason I'm showing the Shrine of Compassion for this version instead of Sacrifice. In any case, I would recommend playing a different version than this one, which is why I did for this video. This is the MS-DOS version, also by Origin Systems, which was released in 1987. Right off, we notice the lack of music again, just like the Atari 8-bit version. It only has PC speaker sounds, which is the worst mainstream audio like always. You can just tell it's an old PC game by how bad it sounds. The graphics are rather similar to the Atari STs, especially since both of them came out the same year and it uses EGA with its 16 colors. However, there are a few unique features to the MS-DOS version. It can run on a hard drive, so it runs really fast in comparison with practically no loading time. Well, except when choosing the cards when creating a character, which is incredibly slow for some odd reason. Spell fields look like colorful dripping lines, and secret doors are pretty noticeable since the walls are red, but the dots are white. The dungeon walls are blue and green, and the enemies in it still have black boxes around them instead of being sprites. The dungeon walls are red in combat, though. Oddly enough, the moon phases were still at the slower speed, so they felt way too slow in comparison, and I often got frustrated waiting for them. Come on, I've still got like 16 more versions of this game to do, hurry up! Moving around the game felt great, almost too responsive, as the game ran a little on the fast side for modern systems from around 1987 and didn't scale properly on newer systems. If you held a key down, the keyboard buffer fills up, and even after you let go, you can keep going for another second or two, which had you screaming across the map if you could get a straight line and no encounters. The game supports case now, so I'm Zor with a capital Z. It doesn't make a difference in talking. Though meditating at a shrine does seem to require you to put in the whole name because just doing the first 4 letters isn't good enough in this version. For some reason, combat feels harder in this version. I may have just had bad rolls for damage or whatnot, but it was definitely harder to kill stuff. You can buy up to 99 reagents at a time, just like the ST version. In fact, you can buy multiple weapons at a time as well, as it asks how many you want when I went to buy a couple slings. Not a bad version to play in DOSBox really, though the lack of music is sad. When Ultima 9 came out, this was put out for free. You can even get it free on GOG right now, already set up to play through DOSBox. There is an enhanced DOS version that I'll get to later. Up next is the MSX version released by Pony Canyon in 1987. In fact, Pony Canyon released 5 versions this year, so I'll probably sound a little repetitious for the next few minutes, but we'll see. Right off, we get music, which is good, and no intro sequence. The new character sequence is nice looking, though like the Apple II version, loading each new image causes the music to lag a bit. Alright, I rather like the way the castle music sounds in this version, but the dungeon music is so slow. And just moving around makes whatever song is playing notably lag. I swear this version of the game heard me being impatient with the MS-DOS version's moon phases and figured, hell, it's time to make everything slow. And good lord, everything is slow in this version. I am not pausing between steps, this is truly how slow this version is. Not only that, but it has a huge keyboard buffer at somewhere between 10 and 16 key presses. I made the mistake of holding down the buttons sometimes. Here I am on a ship, just waiting, and waiting for my keyboard buffer to clear. The keyboard buffer also cleared just before your turn in battle, unlike other versions, so I didn't queue up an attack, which often just turned into me moving north for no good reason. Oh, and stats do not pause the game, so I don't even know what to do to pause. Meh. Not only that, but this version felt just a bit harder. I missed more often, enemies seemed to take longer to take down, chests had many traps and loved putting me to sleep, even while things were pounding on my snoozing body. Troll bridges sometimes gave me 2 rounds of trolls to deal with. Not only that, but there were so many battles that by the end of my run-through, I had nearly 1500 gold. I had to rest and heal quite a lot during my routine for the recording. And why is this wonky version of the castle music from Ultima 3 playing while I'm resting? I can't read Japanese, so I'm thankful that the game responds to all the same key presses I'm accustomed to. In fact, the talking to NPCs, though all in Japanese, what you say is in English. In Shrines, you have to type the entire name of the virtue out instead of just typing the 4 letters, kind of like the DOS version, but applies for Hawkwind as well. The graphics are something special. They are a cacophony of wild colors, reminiscent of the Commodore 64 version of Ultima II, though not quite that garish. Maybe more like the PC-98 version of Ultima III. The fields look like the Apple II versions, and so do secret walls. The dungeon walls are blue and cyan and have a slight display glitch in that the horizontal walls slightly overlap the diagonal ones. It looks rather strange. Once I saw some giant rats and kept trying to find them again, but I never could. They looked kinda silly from what I saw, but they were at least in color. I actually liked the bit of a challenge, but the sluggishness was not good. Pass on this version even if you can read Japanese. The PC-88 version was also released by Pony Canyon in 1987. It looks a lot like the MSX version, except lower quality. As I don't really know the specs of the MSX versus the PC-88, I'm going to assume the biggest reason for the apparent downgrade is because the PC-88 was a lower-end system. The new character sequence wipes with a bizarre draw method which looks like they're drawing in color planes one at a time, starting with blue. It doesn't look good at all. Right off, going into town, the game locks up. It turns out I had the wrong disc in, but it gets me ready for some bad loading times. They actually weren't bad, but once you are done talking to someone or enter or exit a battle, prepare to load again. In-game graphics are very similar to the MSX version, except the characters are no longer sprites. You don't see the background tile through them anymore. In the MSX version, they were sprites and had a black outline, so they looked less like stick figures there. Here, the guards look like they have rubber band arms. Boingy, boingy, boingy. The orcs look like hammerhead shark guys with green shirts, and they were doing step aerobics. Otherwise, it felt a lot like the MSX version. Movement was with the number pad, though, with 5 for pass. Every step felt slow and ponderous, maybe a tiny bit faster than the MSX. Battles were tougher again. I went through 15 heal spells and had to rest 6 times to stay alive in my short run. Double troll bridge battles sometimes happened, and you didn't even get a chest for killing them. Ripped off! The music didn't sound quite as good as the MSX version, but it didn't lag when moving even in the dungeons. Walking through the flames to get the Rune of Sacrifice sounded kind of silly. One oddity is, if I typed too fast, my characters turned into kana. I had to type slowly when talking to NPCs. The keyboard buffer only held, it seemed, the last 6 or so key presses. The fields look like the Apple II versions, and so do the secret walls. Dungeon walls are blue and cyan, the enemies in the dungeons were colored, but on black. The PC-98 also got a Pony Canyon version in 1987. This is very similar to the MSX and PC-88 versions of the game, except with double the resolution. With the higher resolution, the demon and dragon in the intro look a bit better, and the new character sequence looks pretty nice. Once we get into the game, the graphics look amazingly familiar. It's almost identical to Pony Canyon's PC-98 release of Ultima III, which came out 2 years earlier. Except oddly enough, this looks like a slight downgrade. Here we see traveling in both games, essentially the same graphics. Here's in a town, here's a battle. And though the background is more boring in Ultima 3 here, notice how much more animated and unique my attacks are. Julia in Ultima 4 here is using a magic axe, but it's just a blob. And the dungeon looks like quite a downgrade as well. That aside, we can tell a lot of graphics were converted either to or from the PC-88 version. We have the bandy-armed guards, and the orcs look pretty much the same, but less hammerhead shark-like this time. The game is much more responsive, but still has mild lag, and keeps a huge keyboard buffer so you can go rushing off unexpectedly if you rapidly press keys trying to get things to move. Also, spacebar doesn't pass, only 5 on the number pad does. As with the other Pony Canyon releases, there are a lot of battles in this version. So many battles, in fact, that by the time I started heading back from the Shrine of Sacrifice, I could afford a magic axe for Julia. When heading back to get her one, some thieves attacked and I was worried they'd rob too much, but we got her one anyways. And we got attacked by a lone rogue while sleeping in the inn. The sound is quite a disappointment in this version. There's an annoying sound every step you take, a shoot sound and a hit sound when you attack, a casting sound, and that's about it. Enemies make no sounds at all. There was just a little clicky sound when walking through the forge to get the Rune of Sacrifice. It kind of reminded me of a modem or fax machine trying to synchronize. The music sounds a bit fast and generic. The fields look like the Apple II versions, the secret walls look like 2 tiles are connected, sort of like the original, but it's a bit harder to see. Dungeon walls are blue and cyan and have a similar glitch effect to what they had in the MSX version. Why didn't they reuse the neat-looking walls and doors from their release of Ultima III? I didn't spend too long trying to find an enemy in a dungeon, but never did. It doesn't say forward in the dungeons anymore, at least. On a side note, the game did lock up on me once when traveling to pause. I forgot to save, so I had to restart. Yay! Thankfully it didn't do it again. And this is the Sharp X1 version by Pony Canyon, also released in 1987. Aside from the emulator I used having scan lines in the display, and the load times being almost non-existent, this is darn near identical to the PC-88 version, to the point where I don't think much needs to be pointed out. I couldn't figure out how to save, it just soft-locked here, and no disk, not even a blank, could get it to work. One thing that does stand out and is different from the PC-88 version is the music. It sounds much worse here, just simple tones. The dungeon music is the worst offender. I had so many battles going through this that by the time I got back to Britain from just going down to pause and back, I had over 1,500 gold. Looks like Julia's getting a magic axe this time! Up next would have been the FM7 release by Pony Canyon in 1987, if I could ever find it. Trying to find this version sucked up hours of my wife's time as she was helping me find these versions. The best she could find was this auction for a physical copy of the game, which I suppose is a collector's item now. However, since Pony Canyon releases were all supposed to be very similar, this is probably a lot like their other versions. Pony Canyon released Ultima IV for the Sharp X68000 in 1988. Like the FM7 version, I could not find this anywhere, but again I found an eBay auction selling a physical copy, this time for a whopping $300. eBay, we've talked about this. I don't ever want to buy overpriced copies of Ultima 4. No, I don't want to make an offer on the FM7 version of Ultima 4. No, I don't want... Wait, why are there Xbox games suggested here? I was looking at FM7 and Sharp X68000 versions of an over 30-year-old Ultima game. Where does Xbox come into this? I don't even have an Xbox. Or play sports games. eBay, you're hopeless. You're just hopeless. Origin Systems released an Amiga version in 1988. Unlike most of the other versions I'm looking at, this one was very similar to the version I played through, since the Atari ST and Amiga versions are on the same processor, the MC68K. The graphics between the two are, so far as I can see, identical, so no need to discuss that aspect at least. Creating a character disc at first was a bit of a debacle. I don't know whether it's a flaw in the game or the emulator, but the first time made bad discs that just crashed the game. The second attempt just froze for 5 minutes. And finally, the third time actually worked. Once I get into the game, I have no idea how to move. I finally figured it out. You have to hold down Alt while pressing the arrow keys. What is it with Commodores or their emulators making it so hard to move in Ultima games? The music plays pretty slow, but sounds rather similar to the C64 version otherwise. It'd probably be faster on an NTSC Amiga. It does have sound effects also while playing, so you get to enjoy this snap-a-lid pop sound every step you take. The combat sounds are really goofy and even has a whistle when somebody flees or you evade a trap on a chest. It makes me think of a referee doing it. All they needed to add was him saying, "Safe!" Oh, and going to Hawkwind causes the music to go really wonky. Here's the castle music elsewhere. And here's standing next to Hawkwind. My guess is that the sleeping fields are somehow causing it to lag. Anyways, this otherwise seems to be just like the ST version. Here is the NES version, called just Ultima Quest of the Avatar, and released by FCI and Pony Canyon in 1990. The game feels like a very poorly conceived rewrite of the game, with minimal effort, everything along the way, and a complete lack of any information. Looking at the manual, apparently it tells you everything the game doesn't. It did not translate to the NES very well, though why they used a 256K cartridge for the game instead of a 384 or 512K cartridge is anybody's guess. For the beginning, we have to look to the manual because it isn't in the game itself. The story here is similar but not the same to the other versions of the game. Since so much was offloaded from the game and put into the manual, let's look at the manual for a moment. Under the Monsters section, it has all new art for the monsters and shows their in-game icons as well. Wait, the Nixie art is a mermaid, but it's definitely a merman in the game. And why does a phantom have the same in-game sprite as a cyclops? The manual also gives you maps for Castle Britannia and the 8 major cities and even clues about the cities, so that's a nice part at least. The music is all unique to this version of the game, and while better than Ultima Exodus's horrible music on the NES, it's not great. Right off in the game, we just get a very simplistic intro screen in this music. It's okay, but it's not Ultima music. The outdoors music sounds pretty dull, and the combat music is bizarre. I don't know what the heck is going on with the city music, but it's obnoxious. Castle Britannia doesn't sound great either, though it does end on what sounds like a throwback to the music for Lord British from Ultima 3, which I found kind of neat. If that's intentional, that is. The shrine music makes me think of a simplified version of Airball's music. The dungeon music, though, is something special. It starts off kind of mysterious, and then suddenly we're in the last Starfighter. Okay, back to the game, finally. You immediately start off answering the Gypsies' questions, but after the first 4, they're really generic and not from the original game, like they kinda just gave up. The last pair just says, "At last, you must choose which you think more valuable," and that's it. Blah. Then Lord British talks to you and you leave this wonky place and appear next to your class's city. Where the heck was that supposed to be? I was just listening to the awful music when a battle happened out of nowhere, and I start in the middle of the screen. Enemies do not show up on the main screen or in the dungeons for that matter. There's probably a tick rate of some sort, and it just randomly decides whether you get attacked if it hits whatever random chance it has. You can at least attack any target, similar to Ultima V's targeting system, except you can shoot through any terrain. On my way to pause, I got into my second battle of the game. I have no idea why I started the battle way up here again. Was this supposed to be an ambush or something? It didn't say. Before long, I get surrounded by enemies, which are just named Enemy 1, Enemy 2, and so on, so I have no idea what these are supposed to be. I think that one's an Eaton? They end up killing me. Back to Castle Britannia. This is just frickin' awesome. There's an auto option in battle that makes your character act like a drunk moron, often moving instead of attacking or hiding in a corner. And this is what your menu option defaults to. Why is the act drunk option in battle the default? When you get another character, why did Julia become Julius? You find out you queue up your moves. What? Why the hell would this be a good thing in this sort of game? Battle was already annoying enough in this game. It's not like you can go auto and do anything useful. The battles are just frustrating and slow. After a battle, a chest drops and you have to do a search, which goes through this whole rigmarole every chest. Once you have more than one character, it takes even longer because now you have to choose who opens it. Speaking of weird, going to view your stats is split into a ton of different menu options. When you go to view a character's stats, it just shows this blank box. What? You have to click again to view stats. When you have another character, a new pop-up shows where you choose the character, but that blank box is still there. Okay. Dialogue is simplified to almost Ultima 3 levels. Sometimes you get a choice, like Bob the Beggar here, who replaces Sprite in Britain, but doesn't tell you anything about the rune. I have no idea what this person has been waiting for, but the music changes when I talk to them. Inns just now say, "Welcome to the hotel." Okay. You find out you have to go upstairs to a Final Fantasy-like set of beds just sitting there, complete with a bath and modern toilet. Seriously? I never found Pepper in Britain, who normally tells you where the rune is. There are black barriers you hit to go to different portions of the maps. I'm guessing this is to allow the game to load maps in sections. However, you can't even tell whether you're allowed to walk into a black space or not. This changes the map in places like Minok, which is now completely surrounded by mountains, or the path to Wrong from Minok, which is just strange. When I got Julius, we started walking around in a Congo line like Ultima Exodus. Yes, even outside, where it still makes no sense. You can buy up to 99 of a reagent at once, except if you try to buy more than a total of 99. It doesn't say why, but it just doesn't let you. It just looks like a bug. And they've been renamed to be shorter, like Silk Web instead of Spider Silk. The shrines have a cute little kiddie gate, like you're at a carnival ride, and you have to talk to the guy out front and show him the rune to be allowed in. And then you go in, and why is there this guy who just says, "Talk to the Ankh"? You don't even need a mantra to meditate. The dungeon walls actually have a texture, but I went to the room I normally hit for these videos and got a room of death with, I think it's 2 demons, 2 Zorns, and 2 mimics. Why is such a difficult room on level 2? What the hell is a defeat spell? As Julius was about to die, I tried to cast heal on him. No effect. Seriously? I despise this version. This is the SEGA Master System version released by SEGA in 1990. Can we just say Sega, or do you really have to say SEGA every time? After playing the awful NES version, I was incredibly surprised by this version. It used a 512K cartridge, so it had double the ROM available that the NES version did, and man does it show. In the intro sequence, we have a remastered version of the Demon and Dragon at the top, the original music, albeit simplified, and decent tile graphics, though the characters are pretty simplistic looking. If we hang around for a moment, we get a full-screen image similar to the original box art. Throughout the game, we get simplified 2-channel music as well as little UI chirps. The music sounds decent, though there are a few parts where it has the wrong notes, such as at the end of the resting song. And the end of the traveling song, which I cringed at every time. When we create a new character, there is the familiar image sequence, unlike the NES version, and it has all new art that looks decent, if not spectacular. I believe all the original text is here. That's a notable thing throughout. This version doesn't cut corners. In fact, it has a number of conveniences added to it. Conversations with NPCs are done through a menu. The basic options always show up, and only through talking do you learn the other options, which makes sense for first-time players. You can't ask Pepper and Britton about the rune until Sprite tells you to talk to Pepper about it. The only time you have to spell out something is with the mantras, which makes sense to me. When buying items, you can buy multiple weapons, and even up to 99 of each reagent at a time if you press to the right when choosing a number, which makes it a breeze to stock up to 99 of the 3 I'll be using. Mixing spells also lets you choose multiples at once. Doing most actions is through a menu from pressing button 2, though I had to look at the manual to find out where status is, hiding under camp. You can pass or abort by pressing button 1. It was very responsive and I picked it up right away. You open doors and enter cities by walking onto them. Doors will close behind you automatically. Simple little changes like this are really nice. Oh yeah, and your food and gold area is always visible across the top of the screen. Again, nice and convenient. When walking through rough terrain, the game says slow progress and averages out how much time you lost, like how Ultima V does it. This is so much better than all the other versions that stop you over and over again randomly, and it made getting the Rune of Sacrifice significantly less frustrating. In battles, your cursor defaults to attack like you'd expect, and it even auto-selects enemies for you with you pressing side to side to switch your target. I didn't even realize right off that slings had a shorter range in this version, but look how easy spamming button 2 makes battles. And you can get chests with a dedicated get chest option that doesn't waste your time. The fields look a bit odd, but very similar to the original versions. The secret walls have a noticeable notch, but it's not the same as the other versions. Dungeons are very different, being showed from an overhead view with each original tile converted to 2 tiles by 2 tiles. The doors and secret walls are offset. All in all, aside from the simplistic character art and the occasional wrong notes in the music, this is an excellent version of the game that has many quality of life additions. It's super zippy and it's easy to play. Good job! SEGA! The last official version was released by Fujitsu on their FM Town system in 1992. This came out after both Ultima 5 and Ultima 6, so it should come as no surprise that it borrowed at least a bit from Ultima 5. There's an introductory story that is in Japanese that is playing Stones, a song created for Ultima 5. It seems to be about your heroes after completing Ultima 3, then another group deciding to send the book's map and Ankh through a moon gate that the Avatar finds at the beginning of Ultima 4. Thankfully, you can choose to play the game in English as one of the choices, though this doesn't apply to that intro sequence. The title screen has a unique version of the city music from Ultima 4, with a few new parts added to it. You won't be hearing this version in-game, however. The new character sequence looks fairly nice and colorful, though the Moongate doesn't animate or even visibly appear in it. I'm not sure what instrument is being used here, but it doesn't sound lute-like to me. When you get to the gypsy, she's older, but you see the familiar-looking cards before long. They are colorful, but have a washed-out look to them. Once you actually get into the game, it's sort of using graphics from Ultima 5, except that here there is no edge detection, so everything is in blocks. If we compare to Ultima 5, you can see that it looks more natural because the edge tiles used in the waters and the river, etc. Still, it gives a bit of a visual update to the game, which didn't have edge tiles in the first place. The game is nice and snappy, and it doesn't maintain a huge keyboard buffer, so I was able to spam click away as I traveled across the terrain. In short, it felt great to play this version. The text when talking to NPCs has a strange amount of carriage returns in it. Sometimes it looks like it was touching my text prompt. Come on, text, back away a bit. The music is decent, though the instrumentation was a little odd at times. The sounds are rather lackluster. In particular, the taking damage sound, which just sounded like static, and casting, which sounded like a brief lightning combined with static. The silly what from the FM Towns Ultima 3 is gone as well. Very much unlike the Pony Canyon releases, there were very few encounters at all. Almost too few. It only took me 20 minutes to do the same run that took me 75 minutes in the PC 98 version because of the fewer random battles, responsive gameplay, quick screen refreshing, and the ease of use of the keyboard buffer. Granted, the speed issue would hopefully be resolved with a then 7-year-old game. The spell fields looked really low res and out of place. Secret walls look like they do in Ultima 5, which is only marginally different than in Ultima 4. The dungeons were just solid colors again, this time in green and gray of all things, and with simple, spazzy enemies that had black borders around them. As a side note, if you're trying to get this working with UNZ, the FM Towns emulator I used, use a .hdm disk to save to instead of one of the .bin files it creates automatically for you. If you use a .bin, the game will just lock up after you finish answering the Gypsy's questions, as it seems unable to access the floppy drive. This is the fan-made enhanced MS-DOS version, released in 2001 by Aradinde Dragon and Wiltshire Dragon. It updates the original MS-DOS version to use VGA graphics and adds MIDI music support. Well, it upgrades some of the graphics to VGA standards anyways. The intro uses the old imagery, as does the new character sequence. The graphics are better, but they're not great. I like the change in the borders with the silver serpents and onks and such, and many of the tiles are improved, looking a lot like the tiles in Ultima 5, though the trees look like patches of broccoli now. The text has a shadow under it now, which makes it just look blurry to me. I don't care for it. Fields look like multicolored dripping lines now, but secret doors are hard to notice as they're just a brick that's slightly smaller than normal. Dungeons look largely the same, enemies are more colorful though, but still have black boxes behind them. And the new character art is really dull looking. Somebody made a generic base, then made everything else use that base, and it really shows. The NPCs in town all look almost exactly the same now, with marginal changes in color, and some are waving. Beggars are spazzing the crap out, really working for a penny. The merchants and children are waving constantly, but then you start fighting some enemies and they all look like you also. You can only tell which of these is the avatar because I'm being highlighted here. Even the orcs and trolls only look marginally changed. For reference, here's the Atari ST version, which has simpler graphics, but everybody looks distinct here. In the enhanced VGA version, even Lord British just looks like he used a simple template. The MIDI music sounds nice when it works. It didn't switch when it should have during the new character sequence, it doesn't turn off and back on again during conversations, which I kinda liked actually, and it didn't play Rule Britannia when you talk to Lord British. Otherwise it seemed to work just fine. Even the shrine music sounds nice and not like it's trying to stab your brain through your eardrums. The sound effects still aren't very good. The gameplay is essentially the same as the MS-DOS version. I played it on a faster system than the original DOS version, and it really shows with how fast the attacks go. Generally, you can't even see your shots because they travel at supersonic speed. If you don't mind the boring character art and invisible shots, this is an improvement. The instant loading and music are definitely nice. The sound effects in the dungeons are still ugly, though. This is XU4, a portable version of Ultima 4 created by Andrew Taylor in 2003 or so. I'm not positive on that year, so don't quote me on it. I'm using the latest version, which is version 1.0 Beta 4 from 2016. This requires the original MS-DOS version to be able to play. I started recording with the standard EGA graphics, then I started playing with their alternate tile sets. I ended up settling on the one named New because it looks fairly high resolution, but it reminds me of the incredibly silly Lareware version of Ultima 3. You can create your own tile sets as well, but since it doesn't support smooth edging like Ultima 5 and above, it's always going to look dated. The The game has a ton of other options as well in its configuration. I didn't play around with these much and just left them on the default. You can even do things like speed up meditation or make combat more difficult. This is a pretty nice version to play. It has quality MIDI files for the music, renders very fast, it's better since it's running on modern hardware, and mostly feels good to play. I say mostly because on the rare occasion something does cause delays, the keyboard handler queues up a few key presses, leading to annoying things happening well after you pressed a key. The enhancements made in the MS-DOS version are all here, such as being able to buy multiple weapons at once and up to 99 of each reagent. However, you can also choose a number of spells to mix, which made mixing 10 Awaken, Cure, and 20 Heal spells really fast. Oddly enough, the sound effects seem to be from Ultima II, particularly the combat sounds. Kinda out of place, really. The shrine music is all sitars, of course, though the low notes do sound rather silly. And getting the Rune of Sacrifice shows that there's no way to even notice you're taking damage except to look at your health dropping. But largely, this is a nice version of the game, and since it works in Linux, Windows, and Mac OS X, just about anybody can play it. If you don't mind going through a couple steps to get it set up, I recommend playing this version if you want to play Ultima 4. There's a link to it in the description. This is Virtue of Humility, created by George Stepan in 2003, and he has done what I thought largely impossible. He has created a version of Ultima 4 I hate even more than the NES version. I know this is just an incomplete free beta version, but man, does this severely test me. Right off, it forces my computer to go into full screen 800 by 600. Always a great way to start. Some parts are pixelated, largely the graphics taken from elsewhere, and other parts are at native 800 by 600 resolution, like the text and the moon phases. Seriously, this is not how moon phases work unless they're always on the opposite side of the planet and this is Britannia eclipsing the moons, except one moon has all 8 phases cycle per one cycle of the other. What is this border art? Are these supposed to be silver serpents? So many design decisions just went horribly wrong here! When the game starts, there's a bunch of sprites that pop up for a moment, then an unskippable credit intro thingy. This plays, I think, an Ultima 7 song, maybe? The water looks like a single space taken from Ultima 6. I have no idea where that super cartoony-looking Disney castle came from, or the ground. If everything was cartoony, this might work, but this game is just all over the place. Making a new character was just all sorts of wonky, with 3D renders showing a violet moon gate. Wait, it says blue in the text! And where is the willow tree? And why is there a Venus symbol on the ground that's regularly used to represent women? An Ankh has a distinct shape, and the crossbar is in the wrong place here. Why is this playing the Ultima 5 City music? Wait, what's going on here? Well, new decorations are nice. Oh, there isn't a keyboard buffer at all, and it keeps losing key presses. Why is this text several different fonts? Why is this menu over my character stats? Why are all the weapons new letters? You can't pass, to have NPCs move or anything like that, but they do on occasion on their own time while just standing around. Wait, I auto-pass just by standing around? I exit Britain and press Q to quit and save, and it just quits, and I have to restart the entire game because you save with F1, not Q like all the other versions. Silly me. Why am I a mage with 175 mana? Why is YOLO joining me? Why is he a cleric? With a crossbow? We should be the same class. Why is Julia a cleric? Why are there clerics in a non-religious world? This isn't Ultima 3 or below. Wait, I'm a mage at level 1 with 100 HP and 175 mana. YOLO's level 2 is a cleric with 200 HP and 400 mana. But Julia is a level 1 cleric with 75 HP and 200 mana. And I can only cast attack spells in combat, but they can only do healing and sleep spells. What the hell? Why does talking to Hawkwind play the Ultima 5 resting music? I mean, resting does that too, but at least it kind of makes sense there. Why do you choose how much you pay per herb, then choose how many you're getting? And why can't my gold show up here while I'm buying to know what I can afford to buy? It's not like that area is in use while buying things. Getting the Rune of Sacrifice doesn't seem to hurt, except near the end, without moving, it was randomly hurting. If the avatar dies, you immediately go back to Lord British. He doesn't say much in this version. Sprite doesn't let you say beg to get the dialogue option where she tells you to ask Pepper about the rune. Enemies make Ultima 3 shooting sounds with a large delay before hit or miss sound occurs. There are no bridge trolls. Enemies spawn on mountains in the hill battles. Once I fought some seahorses on a bridge, and the avatar fled before I got to do anything. In fact, you flee 2 tiles up from the bottom of the combat screen just to mess with you. There's now a village next to Castle Britannia named Bedonia. What's the Black Isle? Just the best in tinkering? Why would I pay you for tinkering? What is this even? You get so little gold from chests as it is in this version. Do I really need to waste more? Oh, some spiders in town. And now I'm dead. Why does the border overlap the tiles properly in some cases and not in others? Why does the moon gate look like the one from Ultima 3? Why do the bars and the text in towns look so awful? The dungeons look alright with 3D images and sliding along, though it's very minimalistic looking and kinda glitchy. What's that growl? I got in a fight with... Are those Shadow Lords? I'm on level 1 of Wrong, and I'm up against Shadow Lords. In dungeons, you always seem to get surrounded and you could shoot through walls? Wait, did I actually kill a Shadow Lord? What is going on? Why did I not get to move before another battle and a third time? Level 2 isn't the same as in the original. Does this version not have special rooms? This is so buggy. I pressed north to see if I could move north through the mountain here. Nope. 2 characters later, Julia goes north before I press anything. What the? The dungeon goes flicker, 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 flicker. Randomly, the screen will start flickering black and white. You can't actually see it in my recording, but it was going between them at about 120 frames a second. It hurt to look at. Viewing your stats fixed it sometimes. I'm not even mentioning the typos and the other problems. Just no. No. There was a Flash version of Ultima IV created in 2010 by Blair Leggett. Apparently he received a cease and desist from Electronic Arts in 2011 to remove it from his site. I did find the primary SWF file for it, but it's hard-coded to only work from www.phipsisoftware.com. So I had to fake that as a host, configure a web server with that name, and the end result is still unplayable. It looks like it was using assets from the VGA MS-DOS version. As soon as the music starts, the bottom turns solid black and nothing is interactable. I tried clicking all over and tons of key presses, various versions of Flash and different VMs all the way back to Flash 11, and I couldn't get it to work. Maybe there's another version that isn't broken, but I tried and couldn't get this one to work. Sorry. There is a game creation system called MegaZeux that was originally created in 1994 and has been ported to all sorts of different systems. I never heard of it before finding out an Ultima 4 was created for it in 2010 by a Dr. Lancer X. Well, this is gonna be a bit of a different experience. The native resolution of the MegaZeux version is strange, at 640 by 348. The game seems to be using the EGA MS-DOS graphics, but they're rather distorted, missing some pixels. I'd assume I was playing with the setting wrong, but that's how the screenshot looks on the website for the game as well. Also, everything animates in a 4-frame sequence, which is reminiscent of Ultima 3. They're not animated independently. All these gazers are in sync, and these cyclopses. And your characters are cheesy 2-frame animations in comparison. The intro doesn't have the demon and dragon chained up, and the animation is really fast while an Impulse Tracker mod version of the city music is playing. Making a new character feels lackluster as well, with no imagery at all, just text at the bottom of the screen. When music starts up, it's the merchant music instead of the city music, and it starts as you approach the gypsy wagon. Choosing virtues in the beginning has card images at least. Once you get into the game, it plays mostly like the MS-DOS version, though you use space to exit the stats. Escape just opens an Exit MegaZeux pop-up. You can zip along really quickly in this version by holding down keys. Wait, where did those orcs come from? Load times are non-existent at least. Castle Britannia always plays Rule Britannia, and talking to Lord British plays the Lord British's castle music from Ultima 3. Odd. Combat is strange. The AI is really terrible and just tries to head directly at you, getting caught on simple things like these mountains in the hill combat zone. The sounds are like the combat sounds from Ultima 2. The dungeons are an overhead view, only 1 tile per space, unlike the Master System version. Why are we fighting gazers on level 1 of the dungeon? Arg! Not my preferred way of playing, but it seems playable at least. I have a link to MegaZeux and its version of Ultima 4 in the description. And now for something unique. A new Kraken trainer for the Commodore 64 version of Ultima 4 came out in 2015, called Ultima 4 Remastered by Genesis Project. When releasing the crack, they also revamped the graphics, fixed some bugs, and made numerous changes. Immediately obvious is that they made the game run on only 2 discs, with only 1 needed while playing. It also seems to load a bit faster, a welcome change since the C64 tends to load very slowly. The sound, music, and gameplay are all nearly identical to the Commodore 64 version if they aren't identical, but the tile set has been changed, mostly with the humans, making them more colorful. I'm not particularly a fan of most of the new NPC images and really hate the new mountains, but a lot of the rest of this looks fairly nice. The new character images are quite astonishing, though, compared to the original C64 version. I'm quite impressed with what they did here and rather like the new artwork. I'll have this version show up right alongside the C64 version in my giant wall of comparisons if you want to see more of the visual difference. If you have a reason to play this on the Commodore 64, I recommend checking this out. There's a link to it in the description. There are so many versions of this game. I'm going to be showing 16 versions at a time to compare how they look. I'll also just play the city music and switch between them so you can hear what they sound like in comparison. I haven't included the ST version since it looks exactly the same as the Amiga version, nor the Sharp X1 version since it looks exactly the same as the PC-88 version. But I was playing the city music for each this whole time so you could hear them. For the full comparison, I'll occasionally briefly show which versions they all are, but man are we cramming a lot on one screen. I will be releasing a 1080p version of this comparison as a separate video, and a link to it will be in the description once it is ready. From the upper left and going through them, we have Apple II, Atari 8-bit, Commodore 64, Genesis Project, Amiga, MS-DOS, Enhanced MS-DOS, MegaZeux, MSX, PC-88, PC-98, FM Towns, NES, Sega Master System, XU4, and Virtue of Humility. A couple mods were made for Neverwinter Nights that were supposed to be remakes of Ultima IV, and the first one is called Avatarship by Zonker. As far as I can tell, it was originally developed in 2007 or so, but it could have come out earlier. The version I found and used is version 1.3 from 2014, and there's a link to it in the description. I've played all the way through Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2, well, the enhanced editions, but I've never actually played Neverwinter Nights. I don't even know why I have a copy of it. Since it's by BioWare, I was expecting to be able to just jump into the game, but it's using 3rd edition D&D rules instead of 2nd ed, and it seems to be a lot more like Darkstone than Baldur's Gate. The music used in this mod is all over the place, in quality, source, and volume. In the beginning, a MIDI version of the Ultima IV traveling music is played loudly. When I got to Britain, it played Ultima VI and later's version of Stones, with a bunch of bad notes at the beginning, very quietly. When I went to a shop, it played the horrible city music from Ultima Exodus on the NES really loudly. Why? Why would you do this? It starts off with you having a dialogue with a gypsy that I think determines the city you start out in. I went to Britain, of course, and had no idea what I was doing. The arrangement of Britain was nothing like what I was familiar with. In fact, I ended up going to 4 different cities in this mod, and everyone just seemed to be random terrain and buildings, always with an inn, weapon shop, armor shop, etc. that all looked exactly the same. Britain had a river area, Paz had some farms, but mostly it was pretty homogeneous looking. In Britain, before long, I found a weapon shop, and got a bow and some arrows. Almost all of the NPCs were different around town, and clicking on them to talk didn't do anything. It turns out you have to use the chat and type, sort of like an Ultima IV, though the more thing didn't seem to work quite right. It felt pretty janky to use, really. I found YOLO who said some very confusing things. What the heck is he talking about? I also found Sprite and talked to her, and she mentions Joe knows about the rune. What? What happened to Pepper? I searched everywhere and did eventually find Joe in the inn who wouldn't talk about the rune. So where is Spicy Woman Pepper? Where is my Pepper?
Where is my Pepper?
I traveled to Paz, which was fairly bizarre. It didn't look much like the path I'm familiar with. When I reached Paz while wandering around, the game crashed and I lost most of my video there. Not doing great so far. I reloaded and turned around and 4 orcs spawned that rapidly killed me. This is gonna be great! With some reloading, running, using up the starting healing potions I had, and slowly taking them down, I finally beat them and got a whopping 5 gold for my effort. Oh great. I bought a couple healing potions with my remaining gold. These are far, far more expensive than what I earn fighting the orcs. Okay, easier stuff then. I go towards Minok and fight some goblins. I get hurt a bit, but I get absolutely nothing for it. You don't regenerate health, you can't rest without buying food, you can't sleep in an inn, and so on. If you don't have money, you're screwed. And I had none. I couldn't just teleport to Minok because there was a moon gate on the map that didn't work. So I ran through bizarre, unfamiliar maps vaguely in the direction of Minok. I had to go through Cove on the way. Okay. Anyways, I finally get to Minok and look all over trying to find Julia or the poorhouse, and I cannot. You know what? I'm done here. The second Neverwinter Nights mod is called Ultima IV Reborn, by Devi and updated by Glenestelle Dragon, originally from 2010 or so. It's closer to the original Ultima IV experience than Avatarship, but I was still fighting the Neverwinter Nights UI and system when playing it. I just picked a pre-made fighter to get into the game faster, the gypsy asks questions taken from the original Ultima IV, and it seems to govern where you start out. In Britain, things are more or less in the same places, with buildings that have NPCs in another zone. I found Sprite, Pepper, and lots of Joes as you would expect. You don't type to NPCs in this version, it has conversation trees, similar to the Master System version of Ultima IV. The Rune of Compassion is at the end of a hallway in the inn, pretty much right where it should have been. YOLO actually joins me, which isn't a huge surprise since the game doesn't have the same concept of classes as the original, but I can't access his inventory and he likes just standing around. The music is all unfamiliar to me, but it may just be stock music that comes with Neverwinter Nights. The sounds are fairly minimal as well. Julia speaks when you talk to her, though it is rather out of place, which was startling after so little sound. When I reach the magic shop and pause, you have to find a hidden spot to click to get into it instead of walking through a false wall. But everything here was not familiar, and I didn't find any reagents at all. There's an alchemy table here too, which you would use to mix spells, but I didn't have the reagents. I made my way to Minok and proved that I've never played Neverwinter Nights before by seeing a Welcome to Minok sign and just walked into this tiny, pointless, clear spot, clueless as to where Minok was or if this was incomplete. You see, you have to angle the view just right and click just the right spot, and this teleports you into the city. Combat doesn't work like Ultima 4 at all. I tried using a sling, and boy was that pointless. There's too much D&D left for this to feel like Ultima 4's combat, so I just fought with the short sword I started with. When I tried to get to the Rune of Sacrifice, I died pretty much instantly. When I went to the Shrine of Compassion, I couldn't do much because I hadn't learned the mantra. You can't just type it in. And when I tried to get into Wrong, an Eaton was outside of it, and one-shot each member of my party. Why are there floating windmill sails here? Well, if you turn your camera just right, you can see the rest of the windmill appear. Okay, smart guy, so what about this floating tree? I know, it just smoked mushroom swampweed.
Holy Robar!
In any case, if you enjoyed Neverwinter Nights and wanted to play Ultima 4, well, kind of, you might get the gist from this, maybe. It appears that someone named, I think it's pronounced Combragol, is in the process of making a new mod for the MS-DOS version of Ultima 4 called Ultima IV Trinity. I had to waste quite a bit of time getting anywhere because this is not in a finished state and their website is not even remotely helpful. First thing, I do web programming for a living, and this website pisses me right off. I clicked on Start, and it doesn't let me get started using the mod. No, it has hotspots show up that cause pop-ups with content that doesn't even fit into their content boxes. Or it has the hotspots show right through the pop-ups they spawn. Okay. I go to a blog post and just get a giant image. Oh, there's a scroll bar. Scroll. Hey, content! Content's hiding down here! We've got content here! There's a link to the project on GitHub, which, well, it has some assets and some code. Yep. No description on where the code is or how to run this. I tried from the C drive in the build environment, adding the Avatar.exe to the original files, and got ambushed by some insects that crashed the game. This is gonna be an adventure! After some dinking around, I finally got something running off of their D drive, which has every city all in a row, plus some extras, a dragon mount to ride and shoot things with, and so on. This looks like a testing world more than anything else. Whoa, Castle Britannia is different, with occasional graphics from Ultima V, and now it has another story that, well, that looks really glitchy. Maybe this will be worth looking at later. In particular, if they can combine their efforts with the enhanced VGA MS-DOS version, because it feels really empty without the music. If you want to try to mess with Ultima IV Trinity yourself, I have a link to it in the description. A completely unofficial sequel for Ultima 4 was created by Chris Hopkins using his Adventure Creation Kit and was released in 2009, called Ultima 4 Part 2. I'm including a link to it in the description, as I recommend any fans of the Ultima series to check this out. It's free, and because it's quite ridiculous, silly, and actually fun to play through. If my mother was still alive, she'd probably love it, since it reminded me a lot of her style of humor. I enjoyed it enough to play the 4 or 5 hours it took to go all the way through the whole game. It runs in DOS or DOSBox, so you can play it on just about any system through the emulator. The base game plays like a simplified version of Ultima V, which fits with being Ultima 4 Part 2. The game is laden with spoilers, references, and jokes that rely heavily on knowledge on the whole Ultima series, at least through Ultima 8, but also includes many pop culture and game references from the 70s through the 90s, such as Night Court Deliverance, Army of Darkness Adventure, E.T. Pac-Man, Space Invaders, Rogue, King's Quest, Bard's Tale, and Scar Bray, of course, and so on. Not only does it have various music from Ultima 3 through 6, but it also has some other music as well. Right from the beginning, the game doesn't take itself remotely seriously, with a subtitle of Dude, Where's My Avatar? And an intro sequence with the Avatar and Shamino running away from the Shadow Lords from Ultima 5 while Yakety Sax is playing. The game starts with you in the same room on Earth that Ultima 6 starts out in, watching Jerry Springer when you see Exodus, Minex, and Mundane have some family drama, and it turns out they all run to Britannia to cause more trouble. The Gypsy calls you, apparently the Ultima 9 version of her, and starts doing the card thing like always, but you just give up and skip it and jump to Britannia instead, bringing a shotgun along. You find out Mondane's family has taken over and completely perverted the virtues, so instead of truth, love, and courage, they're now drugs, sex, and rock and roll. The cities have all been converted to devotion to the new virtues, with sigils instead of runes and new mantras. Dancing instead of sacrifice, virility instead of justice, heavy metal instead of honor, partying instead of spirituality, and rehab instead of humility, where you learn the mantra is no, because of course it is. I really don't want to spoil much in the game for anybody interested. I will have to make an entire, thankfully short video talking about this game, but for now, if you're interested, give it a shot. This was definitely the high point for me trying all these spin-offs and alternate versions of Ultima IV. And, interesting to note, the game engine this is running on is called the Adventure Creation Kit, also created by Chris Hopkins. It was designed to be an improvement on Stuart Smith's Adventure Construction set, which was a spiritual successor to Alibaba, which was my first JCG episode. Electronic Arts and Mythic Entertainment made an iOS-only free-to-play action RPG based very loosely on Ultima IV that didn't last very long, called Ultima Forever: Quest for the Avatar. Ultima IV Ever. Ha 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 ha. It came out in August of 2013 and was shut down in August of 2014. You might remember the now defunct Mythic Entertainment from their even more controversial free-to-play game, Dungeon Keeper, which came out a few months later. The gameplay video you see here is taken from Touch Gameplay on YouTube. I have a link to it in the description, since I cannot play this game on my own to record anything as it doesn't exist anymore. Ultima Forever looked like a very generic mobile dungeon crawler where you spent most of your time tapping enemies to death. It received many negative reviews as it was over-monetized like almost everything else Electronic Arts has released for mobile devices, with bronze, silver, and gold keys to unlock chests for better and better loot. You could smash bronze keys together to get silver keys. This all sounds very typical of mobile games. Your equipment broke over time, there were single-use power-up cards, and so on. Oh, and because they couldn't use Lord British in the game since the name is owned by Richard Garriott, this had a Lady British instead. The virtues were literally 8 sets of experience, and that's pretty much it. You chose dialogue options that may raise you in virtues, and raising the virtues increased your experience. And the gypsy voice kept telling you that there are no wrong choices, or it isn't easy to choose, as if it wasn't annoying enough. In fact, she wouldn't stop talking.
An impressive achievement. You have helped many, stranger. There is no right answer, but you have done well.
A couple months after officially releasing the game, they started having double virtue events. At one point, your character actually says, "Virtues level me up? Got it." This entire game is really missing the point of Ultima IV, especially since it's just a Diablo clone where you break random stuff in dungeons to get more loot, and even loot tombs for treasure. This doesn't require the players to give half a damn about what the virtues actually mean, or have any sort of morality involved. I know my opinion here is going to be in the minority, but let's look at this review at Eurogamer that gave it a 2 out of 10. This is a game built for idiots. Everything is straightforward, to the point of absurdity. Combat comes down to just tapping on enemies constantly. It really does. Go into a dungeon, tap furiously for 10 minutes, leave. It also mentions the dungeons were randomized like in Diablo. Replace the word tap with click in the first quote, and this is exactly how Diablo's combat is too, albeit with even less to do because you don't even have special moves in Diablo. But Diablo was highly praised, whereas this game was very poorly received, and largely the criticism of this game is because it's like Diablo. I got so bored of Diablo for exactly the reasons listed for hating this game, aside from the stupid key system and microtransactions. And forgive me for sucking at Diablo, as it runs a little small on my 4K screen. So this is how you make a horrible remake of a game. Make it a Diablo clone, completely ignore the story and or message behind the original IP, then add crappy microtransactions to it. I hate mobile gaming. And for once I could actually talk about something almost topical, because guess what game is coming to mobile soon, modeled after this very formula and is a clone of itself. Diablo! By mid-1989, Ultima IV had sold 400,000 copies, which was a huge success for a game in the 80s. It has regularly appeared in people's favorite RPG lists and shows up on top RPGs lists by several different gaming publications. In my opinion, it is one of the most important CRPGs ever released, especially since the premise is so unique. Many people consider it the best game in the series because of this uniqueness. The notorious game journalist, Scorpia, considered it the best game ever made. Good Old Games, or GOG, has the MS-DOS version of Ultima IV available for free with DOSBox. I recommend using that with XU4 for an easy-to-use native experience to spend the 20 or so hours it takes to play through this unique and rewarding game. I already spoke about the Ultima series at length in my Ultima II video, and Origin Systems in my Ultima III video. The name of Skara Brae is said to be an homage to Skara Brae from Bard's Tale, though. Hawkwind, who guides you through the virtue process, is unique to this game. It is the SCA name of real-life Roe R. Adams III, who wrote most of the documentation for Ultima 3 and 4 and helped create the virtue system with Richard Garriott. Since he has also contributed to Wizardry and Bard's Tale, there are characters named Hawkwind in those games as well. A never-implemented plot point for Ultima 9 was going to have Hawkwind reveal that he was also the Time Lord that showed up in Ultima 3, and that he is the last survivor of an ancient race called the Ultima that were destroyed by their evil halves, and that he also wrote the Codex of Ultimate Wisdom. Yep, that doesn't sound stupid at all. So many right-wing extremists bashed Ultima 3's use of a demon and computer RPGs in general for their satanic or evil imagery. Richard Garriott decided that for his next Ultima, it would be completely the opposite, instead focused on being virtuous and righteous. It evolved into something quite unique. The game has various Buddhist-like principles throughout it, such as the 8 virtues being like the Eightfold Path, seeking enlightenment and bettering oneself through meditation. The Buddhist equivalent of the Avatar is called a Buddha, though it isn't quite exactly the same thing. The term Avatar is Hindu in origin and means an incarnation of a deity on Earth. It's quite a shift from the slaughter everything mentality of pretty much every role-playing game before and after it. I've come to realize that in our modern world, obeying this specific set of rules is a horrible thing to do to yourself. With humility, you just let people walk right over you, and it always feels in direct conflict with valor. With compassion and sacrifice, you let people around you know that you're the go-to person to help solve their problems. I eventually became quite a hermit after a third friend essentially cut off all communication with me except when he wanted help with his computer problems. I'd help, then he'd disappear again. I've had a total of 9 different people living with me for free for a range of a few weeks to a couple years. Only one of them even talks to me anymore and is at least still a good friend. There's just a point where you realize that people are awful to you if you let them be, and nobody cares how virtuous you think you are, nor do they ever think to reciprocate or better themselves. They largely only care about what you can give them until you say no, then they will disappear from your life.